one question is there a hidden Trump vote that'll come out again like they did in 2016, or is there a hidden uh, Kamala Harris vote, which would perhaps be women coming out in greater numbers, including younger women? Does that happen, or do both happen?
So we are a week away, Jim. It's finally crept up. This incredibly important, incredibly close, incredibly weird election. How do you judge it a week out?
Well, this is a really exciting time. I've been involved in many elections, and the final week is unbelievable in some ways. Of course, we should keep in mind a lot of votes have already been cast. I don't know what the exact number is, but it's an unusual situation. So a certain high percentage is already in the bank, so to speak. But of course, what happens in the next few days is critical, and election day itself remains the single most important day. It's really a nail biter. I hate to use that expression, but it truly is. Most of the experts I've listened to and talked to really can't make a flat out prediction. It's very different from 2016 when it did seem that Hillary Clinton was going to win. Ultimately, of course, didn't. That's made everyone really gun shy about predictions, I think.
And that's interesting, isn't it? Because that inability to spot the Trump vote in 2016, does that mean people are overstating the Trump vote in 2024? I've seen some Democrats clinging to hope to say, well, hang on a second, we've seen what happened in 2020, we've seen what happened in 2016. We think there might be an overstatement of the Trump vote somewhere along the line, or is that just people clinging to hope if they're on the Democrat side of the ball?
Well, there's two sides to that coin. One question is there a hidden Trump vote that'll come out again like they did in 2016, or is there a hidden Kamala Harris vote, which would perhaps be women coming out in greater numbers, including younger women? Does that happen, or do both happen? In which case it really is a jump ball. I think the pollsters have tried to correct for what happened in 2016. But the question is, as you suggest, maybe did they overcorrect or not? Some of these voters are just hard to reach in polls. It's hard to get people to answer cell phone calls. So it's a bit of an inscrutable mystery.
And that's why it really is genuinely, you think it's unknown, because we've come to rely on polls in this country. And actually, if you look at the polls in our last general election, they were pretty wrong. But because the overall message was Labour were going to win and Labour did win, the Labour vote was really overstated in the polls. But our electoral system meant that Labour will win. And because the margins were so great, it didn't really matter. But the polls were fundamentally not that close. So presumably in an election that's much tighter, not close polls really mean we're in the dark.
Yeah, and I think it'll remain that way. And as I mentioned, I think people are going to be afraid to be too conclusive about it. I think you're going to see a continued close race in the battleground states. I think one thing to watch is where does each candidate spend the majority of their time over the next 7-8 days, because they're going to have the best polling. They're really round the clock at this point. And so as you watch them finalize their schedules, where are they going? Because that could tell you the tale of where it's closest.
What do you make of the last couple of days? I suppose the legacy of that Trump rally in Madison Square Garden has been the Puerto Rico joke by the comedian. The Latino community was seen as quite an important constituency. Trump has done historically pretty well in ethnic communities compared to the Democrats, compared to history, at least. Do you see that moving the dial at all?
Well, I think those insider polls may tell that tale as to whether the votes are shifting. I happen to know two women who are Puerto Rican who were at the rally. They personally weren't offended by it. But of course, there's a larger narrative happening here. And some Democrats hope that Tony Hinchcliffe is the James Comey of 2024. I don't think he looms that large because he's a comedian. He's not the candidate himself. But it gave the Harris campaign something to latch onto for a couple days. I don't think it'll have a lasting effect, but we'll see. It's a very close race. A little bit can go a long way. But I'd be kind of surprised if it's still in the storyline come 3 or 4 days from now.
It's interesting you spoke to two Puerto Rican women. What did they say that was just it's a joke from a comedian and therefore it's got nothing to do with Trump?
Yeah, it was like 5 hours before Trump spoke. He's I guess I don't really know who he is, but he's apparently known for his outrage comedy. And if I was running that rally, I wouldn't have let him speak. But that's not me. And so it's obviously, I think it was obviously a mistake. He shouldn't have said what he said. And I'm sure privately, at least, Trump is not happy about it. But nonetheless, it'll be interesting to see what Kamala Harris has to say in Washington tomorrow, because she's obviously going to the place where Trump had his rally in January 6th. And will she concentrate on Trump yet again, or will she try to shift and explain more about what she stands for? Because I think that's a missing ingredient for her campaign.
Well, we're speaking to someone on the program today who has works in government for 30 years, didn't vote Trump the last 2 times, but is voting Trump because he thinks the Democrats, he's voting against the Democrats. He's making the case that actually Trump is kind of mad, and but the systems of government will be a check on him because he's not their person. And actually that's better than voting in a Democrat who is going to try and control life, is going to try and be that sort of, in a word I think he would probably use, woke approach to the world. And therefore it's a vote against the Democrats rather than a vote for Trump. And presumably there's a risk in this election that everyone is voting against something rather than voting for something.
Yeah, I think that's true. Somebody mentioned that for 3 straight elections, both parties have offered candidates who, frankly, are not the favorite of the public. And so people have been somewhat dissatisfied with the choices they've been given. And there's also a bit of a reversal happening between the 2 parties. The Republicans used to be the party of more of the elites, and I think the Democrats have moved in the direction of being the party of the elites, whereas the Republicans are sort of moving more towards the middle and working class. And so that's kind of shifting some of the dynamics of a race like this, making it even more unpredictable, because there is a bit of a growing elite divide between college-educated people and non-college educated.
We see that in this country as well, I think, actually. Jim, just finally, how sanguine are you about that this will, whatever happens, this will go okay for democracy? I mean, I think I saw a poll that up to a quarter of Americans think this could lead to civil war. I'm not entirely sure how that would actually happen. But how confident are you that by November 6th, we'll have a winner? Maybe November 8th, maybe November 10th, maybe December, that the winner will be accepted. Tell us how you're feeling about democracy.
Well, I feel pretty good about democracy. I don't think either way that's at high risk. Personally, I was involved in the 2000 campaign, of course, and so I was in the middle of that drama. But it wasn't. I mean, democracy kind of worked its way through the system. I think in that case, personally, I felt the Supreme Court made an erroneous decision, but nonetheless, we respected it and it was over. But it did take a number of weeks. I think this time, some people think that if Trump is winning, that'll be apparent fairly early in the evening on election night. But if Harris is winning, that may take a while to kind of sort out how the votes are landing.
But that's a problem, isn't it, Jim? So I remember in 2020, I remember coming into the studio at 3:00 in the morning, and because Trump, as predicted, was doing well early, that set the narrative that Biden stole the election. But actually, if you just reverse the order of states, no one would have said Biden stole the election. So that could be a problem, I guess.
Yeah, and in a state like Pennsylvania, for example, they do not start counting the votes, the early votes or the absentee votes, until the end of the polls have closed, and so you're not going to get all those votes counted early in the day, and that presents a problem, particularly if it does come down to one state like Pennsylvania, and it might. That result wouldn't be known until sometime in the next day, perhaps.
In 2000, the world was the world not a nicer place, a more polite, a more adherent to social norms place than it is in 2024, Jim? It might not have felt like that when you were working on the campaign, but is that not a lesson that we can't rely on what happened in 2000 because the world of social media didn't exist then, and it's a meaner old place now, Jim? Do you buy that argument?
Yeah, well, there was the so-called Brooks Brothers riot in one of the counting places in Florida. It wasn't exactly a riot, but there was some physical activity happening that was inappropriate. So there was a little bit of that, but most of it played out in courtrooms and news conferences, and so that's ideally what happens in the future. But there may be marches and so forth, but I'm not ultimately too worried about whether the system will work or not. I do hope we do find out, in a pretty good amount of time, because the longer it does drag out, the more difficult it'll be to get one side or the other to accept what's happening.
Oh, that's very, very fairly put. Jim, great to speak to you as ever. We look forward to carrying on the conversation as we get closer and closer to the election. Thanks so much for joining us.
Thanks so much. Take care.